I'm Martha Ellison, 70 years old, and I still wake up every morning at 6 sharp, even though there's no office to get to, no typewriters, clicking, no calls to transfer. Just the sound of the wind brushing the old rose bushes outside the kitchen window. This morning, I noticed a chip in the paint above the pantry. I've been meaning to fix it for 3 years now. But somehow, the silence of this house always makes me forget. It used to be filled with laughter and arguments and Sunday breakfasts. Now it's just me, a kettle that whistles out of habit, and a photograph of Henry on the mantel. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to reclaim something that mattered to you. I was born and raised right here in Maple Glen, and I never had dreams of going far. It's a quiet town. One of those places where everyone knows your middle name. And what kind of pie you bring to the church bake sale? I married Henry when I was 22, and we built a life the way folks used to. One paycheck at a time, we saved, carefully, bought our house on Birch Lane when Henry got his first promotion, and raised our only son Craig in that same 2-story house with its creaky stairs and wild roses out front. I worked as a secretary at Dunlap and Finch for 45 years, and only retired when my eyesight started giving me trouble. Craig grew up watching me iron Henry's shirts before dawn and budget the grocery envelope down to the last dollar. We never had much, but we had a rhythm. Craig was always a numbers kid, sharp smart, a little too serious for his own good, while other kids played tag. He was counting his quarters, lining up his action figures by height. I used to think his seriousness would make him dependable, but lately, I'm not so sure. He's an accountant now, lives out in the suburbs with Shelley and their 2 kids, Dylan and Macy. Shelley's the kind of woman who always looks like she's posing for a magazine ad. Her words are, clipped her compliments feel like business transactions, and the children? Well, I barely recognize them anymore. After Henry passed 4 years ago, Craig started visiting less. At first, he helped with little things, fixing the railing, bringing the kids around for dinner. Then the visits got shorter, fewer. Now he only comes when something needs to be signed. Or if Shelley's sent him with a request, we still hold family dinners once a month last Saturday of every month. Always has been, always will be. Or so I thought. Lately those dinners feel less like gatherings and more like appointments. Last weekend, I went to the market early as I always do. Roast beef for Craig, fish, for Shelley frozen pizza, just in case the kids turn up their noses at everything else. I even dusted the good china as I always do. But when I got back to the house, arms full of grocery bags, I saw Craig's car already in the driveway. The front door was unlocked, and when I stepped inside, I heard voices from the living room. I paused in the hallway. Not sure why I didn't call out. Craig was pointing at the den, calling it a perfect study. Shelley was talking about combining bedrooms for a bigger walk-in closet. They were planning renovations room by room, down to the playroom for the kids, and they hadn't even said hello to me yet. They hadn't even noticed I was home. I stood there with a bag of carrots in my hand, realizing they were talking about my home, as if I'd already left, or passed on, as if I were nothing more than a formality to be dealt with. I walked into the room and made a little noise so they'd know I was there. Craig looked startled, then smiled that fake smile I've seen on him more often lately. Shelley smoothed her blouse and said they were just trying to help get things ready for dinner. I nodded and didn't say a word about what I'd heard. Not then, not yet, but as I unloaded the groceries in silence, my son stood behind me, talking about communities for active retirees, with libraries and hobby clubs and walking paths, as if he were reading from a brochure, and I just kept unpacking canned peas and ground pepper, and wondering when exactly my own son decided I didn't belong in the house I built with his father that night at dinner. I set the table. Like always, I served roast and apple pie like always, but nothing about it felt the same. Dylan and Macy barely looked up from their phones. Craig kept circling the conversation back to that facility, as if I were some puzzle piece that needed rehoming. And when I didn't agree right away, he told me they'd already booked a tour for the next weekend. As if my answer didn't matter. as if my silence meant yes, I didn't argue. Not then, but later, when I was alone in the kitchen, rinsing plates that no one had offered to clear. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the table with the steam rising in front of me, and I decided something quietly firmly. I would not be dismissed like a broken chair. I would not be moved like a forgotten box in the attic. Craig came by again the following Wednesday. No call, no warning. Just the sound of his key turning in the front door. As I was pruning back the rose bushes, I wiped my hands on my apron and met him in the living room, where he stood like he owned the place, flipping through the mail I'd left on the side table. "We need to talk," he said, not even bothering with a greeting. He moved toward Henry's old chair, the one no one had sat in since the funeral, and settled into it like it belonged to him. I sat across from him, waiting. He didn't waste time. "I signed you up for a tour at Golden Pines this Saturday. It's just a visit. No commitment." I kept my hands folded in my lap. "I didn't agree to that," I said. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, like he was trying to level with me. "Mom, you'll like it. It's safe. They've got doctors on site, activity clubs, everything." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched a patch of light move slowly across the rug between us. "And if I don't like it?" I asked. Craig sighed and leaned back in the chair. "We have to be realistic. You're 70. You live alone. This house is too much. You can't keep up with the maintenance." I told him I could hire someone, maybe a handyman. "With what money?" he asked. "You've got your Social Security and a little left in savings. You've been dipping into it for the last few years just to keep things running." I didn't argue. He wasn't wrong, but hearing him lay it out like that felt like being cross-examined. Still, I said, "I'm managing, and I intend to keep managing." He rubbed a hand across his jaw. "It's just not sustainable, Mom. You'll be safer at Golden Pines. You won't be alone, and I won't have to worry every time the phone rings." I looked at him then. "And you won't have to feel guilty for not visiting." He glanced away for a second, then shifted back to business. "That's not fair. I have a job, 2 kids, responsibilities." I stayed quiet. He stood and walked over to the fireplace, picking up Henry's photograph. He stared at it a long moment before setting it back down. "Dad wouldn't want you living like this." I didn't say anything. He went on. "You're stuck in the past. This house, it's too big, too empty. Dylan needs a quiet place to study. Macy wants to start piano lessons, but the walls are paper thin at our place." I nodded slowly. "So, you've already decided?" Craig moved back to his seat. "It's a win-win, Mom. You get care and companionship. We get more space. The house stays in the family." I stood. Henry told me this house was mine as long as I wanted it. That was his wish, and I'm not ready to leave it yet. Craig stood too, his voice rising. "You don't know what Dad would have wanted." I held my ground. "He wanted peace for me, and you're not offering that. You're offering convenience for yourself." His mouth tightened. "You're being unreasonable. You're letting your emotions cloud everything." He started pacing. "This house is falling apart. The roof leaks. The paint's peeling. The garden's overgrown. You're clinging to it because you're afraid of change." I shook my head. "The garden's trimmed. I clean every room. I call the repairman when needed. This house isn't falling apart." He scoffed. "You don't see it because you don't want to." Then he stopped pacing and looked at me. "Okay, let's do it another way. You sell me the house at market value. I'll pay for your move to Golden Pines plus a monthly allowance from what's left. You'll be taken care of." I crossed my arms. "And if I say no?" Craig stepped toward me. "Then you're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm offering a solution for everyone." "No," I said. "You're offering a solution for you." His expression tightened. What do you want, Mom? I answered plainly. I want to stay in my home. His tone shifted low and final. That's not possible, I asked. Not possible for who? For me or for your plans? He didn't answer, just clenched his jaw and looked away. You're unbearable, he muttered. I'm trying to help you, and you're just making it impossible. Then he raised his voice. Why can't you just say yes, because I don't want to leave? This is my home. His face reddened. It's not your home anymore. It's an empty shell. Dad's gone. The house should serve the living, not the memories. His words hit me hard. I took a breath, steadying myself. You don't get to decide that. Yes, I do, he snapped. I'm your son. I'm responsible for your safety. You're responsible for your own family, I said quietly. Not for deciding where I live. He stepped closer, his voice low and shaking. I have 2 kids and no space. And here you are, in a 3-bedroom house by yourself. It's illogical. It's selfish. I asked, is that what I am to you now? A burden. Craig looked down. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, I said. To you, I'm just in the way. There was a long silence. Then I said, I'm not going to Golden Pines. I'm not selling you the house. That's final. Craig's face changed anger, replacing surprise. You'll regret this, he said. When you fall and no one's around when you're hurt and alone, you'll wish you'd listened. Maybe, I replied, but it'll be my choice. He grabbed his jacket and turned toward the door. Stay here. Cling to your memories. But don't expect me to come check in every week. You don't check in every week now, I said. He ignored me. I'll give you time. 1 week. Then we'll talk again, hopefully with a more reasonable answer. He paused at the door. This house belongs to the future, not the past. Then he left, slamming the door behind him. I stood in the hallway, heart pounding. My son had just told me in no uncertain terms to get out of the house. I helped build the home where he took his first steps, opened Christmas presents, studied for finals. I didn't cry. I walked to the phone and made a call. Janice, it's Martha. Remember what we talked about? I've made up my mind. She asked what happened, but I only said, come by tomorrow, 10 o'clock. After I hung up, I went to the living room and sat down in Henry's chair for the first time in years. The cushion felt exactly the same, but something inside me had shifted. I looked at his picture on the mantel. I hope you'd understand, I said quietly. Janice arrived the next morning right at 10 like she said she would. She came in holding a folder and a notebook, her usual blend of businesslike and friendly. I'd already set out coffee and 2 slices of lemon loaf. Well, Martha, she said as she stepped inside. I can't say I'm surprised. I've seen that look on your face before. I poured the coffee and sat with her at the kitchen table. She listened quietly as I described what had happened, Craig's pressure, the shouting the final words. When I told her what he said about the house not belonging to me anymore, her jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. Once I was done, she nodded. You know, I've helped a lot of folks move on, she said. But I've never known someone who kept a house this well for so long. She glanced around the kitchen. You and Henry took good care of it. I nodded. We did. She opened her folder and pulled out some documents. If you're serious, I can start right away. The market's in your favor, especially in this part of Maple Glen. I told her I didn't just want to sell, I needed it done quickly before Craig returned the next week. She tapped her pen against the page for a moment thinking. That's tight, she said, but not impossible. I've got a couple looking in this area. No promises, but I'll make a few calls. We went through the rooms together so she could take notes. I told her I wouldn't be taking much with me, just what mattered. The rest could be sold with the house if the buyers were willing. When we reached the upstairs bedroom, she stopped near the window. "You've still got a view of the garden," she said. "That's rare now." After she left, I stood there a while looking at that garden. I'd planted those roses myself, one bush at a time, back when Craig was still small enough to run between the rows. That night, I started sorting through closets. I pulled down the old boxes from the top shelf ones I hadn't touched in years. Tax returns. Henry's letters from his work trips, photo albums from every season of our life. I worked slowly, sitting on the floor with my legs crossed like I used to when Craig was young. I stacked the photos in piles, ones I'd keep, ones I'd let go. There were pictures of birthday parties in the backyard, Christmas mornings in flannel robes, Craig's high school graduation the day he brought Shelley home for the first time. The memories came in quiet waves. I didn't cry. I just kept packing. Over the next 3 days, Janice brought in 3 different sets of buyers. The first were newlyweds who seemed overwhelmed by the size of the place. The second was a young family with 2 little girls who liked the yard but wanted an open-concept kitchen. I walked through the house with each of them answering their questions, keeping my voice steady. On Friday, a couple named David and Karen came by. He was a retired electrical engineer. She'd just left her job as a middle school teacher. Their children were grown and gone. They wanted something peaceful with space for when the grandkids visited. Karen ran her hand along the banister and said, "It just feels like a real home." When they left, Janice pulled me aside. "If they make an offer, it'll be solid. They're not ones to haggle." The next morning, she called and said they'd agreed to the full asking price. We met at her office to sign the initial paperwork. I was calm through the whole thing. My hand didn't even shake as I signed. Afterward, Janice and I sat at a cafe near the courthouse. She stirred her tea and asked, "Have you thought about where you'll go?" I told her I didn't want to stay in Maple Glen, not close enough for Craig to knock on the door. "Far enough to be free?" I said. She paused, then said, "I've got a contact in Seaview Point. Quiet little coastal town, not too far. Friendly folks, good views." "Want me to call?" I said yes. That Monday, I took the bus to Seaview Point. The ride took most of the morning, and I stared out the window the entire time. Fields gave way to pine trees, then hills, then eventually the stretch of blue water I hadn't seen in years. Michael, the local realtor, met me at the station with a warm handshake and a calm voice. He showed me 3 places, but the last one, a small 2-bedroom with a balcony and wide windows, made me pause. It wasn't fancy, but it felt right. The next day, I signed a 6-month lease with an option to buy. Michael promised the place would be ready by the following week. I nodded, still taking in the light through those windows. When I got back to Maple Glen, I started packing with a new pace. I filled 5 boxes with only the essentials. Henry's letters, the wedding photo, the worn quilt we used to keep on the couch, and a few old books that still smelled like our first home. The rest I left for the buyers. Janice arranged the moving truck for Wednesday. She said she'd be at the house to supervise the loading herself. "You just take the bus and don't look back," she told me. That night, I walked from room to room. I touched the edge of the fireplace mantel, the doorframe in the kitchen where Craig's height had been marked in pencil, the edge of the window seat in the den where I used to read with a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table one last time and reached for a pen. I'd been thinking about what to say to Craig for days. In the end, I wrote just a short letter, 3 paragraphs. I folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope, and placed it beside the house keys. By morning, the truck had come and gone. Janice locked up behind me and gave me a tight hug at the station. "Call me when you're settled," she said, "and don't you dare second-guess yourself." I rode the bus back to Seaview Point with my purse in my lap and my name on a new lease. My back was sore and my knees ached from the packing. But I looked out the window as the trees gave way to sea again. I had no idea what waited for me there, but I knew it was mine. The day I arrived in Seaview Point, the ocean breeze met me at the station. It wasn't loud or gusty, just steady, like it had been waiting. Michael stood beside the moving truck, clipboard in hand, already directing the two younger men as they carried boxes up the steps to the second floor. He waved when he saw me and held the door open as I followed my belongings into the apartment. Inside, the light spilled across the hardwood floor. I stepped into the kitchen where the cabinets were already wiped clean, the small table by the window, just waiting for a chair and a cup of coffee. Michael showed me the meter box, the fuse switches where the heater kicked in, and handed me 2 sets of keys. "You'll be comfortable here," he said. "If anything's off, call me." Once he left, I sat on the edge of the bed, still in its plastic wrap, and let the quiet settle in. I didn't unpack everything that day. Just the basics: my kettle, a quilt, a few dishes, the framed picture of Henry that always stood on my nightstand. I heated a can of Soup 8 standing by the window and watched the sky over the water darken from blue to deep orange, then gray. The next morning, I found the laundry tucked beside the stairs and introduced myself to the woman who ran the corner bakery. Her name was Martha, and she was maybe a few years younger than me. We exchanged names and small pleasantries about the weather. She told me about the weekly book club they held in the back room and invited me to come by if I liked to read. I spent the next week walking the boardwalk every morning. It wasn't crowded, just a few people out with dogs or carrying coffee from the cafe across the street. One man, tall and thin with silver hair, nodded at me each morning. Eventually, he stopped to chat. His name was Howard, a retired professor who now swam every day no matter the weather. We started walking together for a few blocks each morning before parting ways. He told me about a classical music circle that met on Thursday evenings, said I'd be welcome to sit in even if I didn't play anything myself. Little by little, I started finding a rhythm again. Back in Maple Glen, Craig had no idea. I imagined him pulling into the driveway expecting the porch light to be on. I pictured him walking into an empty house, seeing the keys and envelope on the table, reading my letter. But I didn't think about it for long. I didn't need to. My days were filling up with new things. I went to the book club and sat near the window as we passed around paperbacks and ginger scones. Martha introduced me to Elizabeth, a quiet woman who painted seascapes and taught a small watercolor class on Mondays. She convinced me to join, and I found I didn't mind the brush in my hand. The lease was 6 months. That's what I told myself when I first signed. Just 6 months, a test run. But as the weeks passed, I started buying things: a small dining set, new curtains, even a shelf for the books I was starting to collect again. I'd never owned a place by the ocean, never even dreamed of it. But one afternoon in March, Michael stopped by and said the owner of the unit was looking to sell. "He's overseas for good," Michael explained. "He wanted to give you the first right since you've been keeping it in such good shape." I asked for a day to think. That evening, I made a cup of tea and stood on the balcony as the wind picked up. The ocean wasn't loud that night, just steady, like it always had been. The next morning, I called Michael. "I'll buy it," I said. The paperwork took a couple of weeks, but when it was done, he handed me the deed and a new set of keys. "Congratulations, homeowner," he said, grinning. I took the keys and put them in my purse next to a receipt from the bakery and a grocery list for the week. To celebrate, I invited a few people over. Martha brought fresh cinnamon rolls and coffee. Elizabeth arrived with a watercolor painting of my balcony view. Howard came with a bottle of wine and a folding chair. He insisted I keep for extra guests. We sat outside, wrapped in cardigans and light blankets, watching the sun drop over the water. Martha asked about my family. I paused. "We're not very close," I said. "I have a son and 2 grandchildren, but we haven't spoken in some time." She nodded quietly. That happens more than people admit, she said. Howard glanced over. Family doesn't always mean people you're related to, he said. Sometimes it's who shows up when you need them. I didn't say anything, but I looked around the balcony at these people I'd only met a few months ago and felt something shift. The following week, I signed up to volunteer at the library. Every Tuesday morning, I read stories aloud to a group of toddlers while their parents browsed the shelves. It wasn't difficult work, but it filled my time with something gentle. In the afternoons, I helped Martha box up pastries for closing. I never stayed long, just enough to sweep the floor and share a quiet hour folding boxes and exchanging stories. Spring turned into summer, and the days stretched long and warm. Howard invited me to a classical music concert in the city park, and afterward we stayed late sipping lemonade and listening to the waves nearby. He told me about a small group planning a trip to Europe, 2 weeks through Italy and France. Just a handful of us, he said. No tight schedules. Just museums, old churches, good meals. I'd never been abroad, not even with Henry. You should come, Howard said. You'd love it. I didn't answer right away, but I kept thinking about it. The house in Maple Glen was gone. The bank account from its sale still sat mostly untouched. For the first time, it occurred to me that I didn't have to wait for someone else to make room for me. I could go wherever I pleased. I woke up the next morning and circled the date on the flyer Howard had given me. I'll go, I told him later that afternoon. We made the reservations the next week. I bought a new suitcase and a travel guide, then started counting down the days. The flight to Rome was overnight. Howard and I sat near the back sharing crossword puzzles and small conversations between sips of ginger ale. Neither of us slept much, but we didn't mind. The plane touched down just after dawn, and we stepped into a city humming with early traffic and golden light. Our hotel was a short drive from the center, tucked between narrow cobblestone streets and cafes already opening their shutters. We traveled with 6 others from Seaview Point, most of them around our age, all of them curious and kind. There was Susan, a retired nurse who brought a small sketchpad to every site. Tom and Linda, married 50 years and still bickering sweetly over maps and menus. The first morning we visited the Spanish Steps, then wandered through a street market where the smell of rosemary and grilled vegetables drifted between the stalls. I bought a silk scarf from a quiet woman who wrapped it for me with careful hands. In the afternoons, we sat at sidewalk tables and tasted things I couldn't pronounce. Howard told stories about his years teaching literature, how he used to assign poetry to students who claimed they didn't care about it. At night, the group would gather over dinner and pass around a bottle of wine until the waiters began stacking chairs. After Rome came Florence. We stayed in a converted convent where the windows overlooked a small garden. I walked the halls of the Uffizi Gallery, moving slowly past works I'd only seen in books. One afternoon, Howard and I split off from the others to visit a small music museum. He stopped in front of an old cello, lost in thought. My mother played, he said, but I never learned. We didn't speak much after that, just walked side by side until the sun lowered behind the rooftops. Venice was the final stop in Italy. The train brought us into the city just before a rainstorm. We crossed over stone bridges as the wind pulled at our jackets. That night, we ate dinner near the Grand Canal. Candles flickered on the table, and the sound of water lapping against the docks carried between conversations. I looked around at the faces of these people I'd only known for a short time and felt quietly like I belonged. The next leg took us to France. In Paris, we toured the gardens at Versailles and sat on benches watching the ducks glide across the ponds. I bought a baguette from a boy who smiled without saying a word. Our last evening was spent at a small restaurant tucked behind a bookstore. The lights were soft, the food simple, the company easy. Howard raised his glass and toasted to new chapters. I clinked mine gently against his and held his gaze just a second longer than usual. We returned to Seaview Point in early July. The heat had settled in by then, but the air near the ocean was still forgiving. The morning after we landed, I stepped onto my balcony with a cup of tea and looked out at the water. My apartment felt different now, still home, but expanded somehow. I unpacked slowly, placing souvenirs in small corners of the space. A coaster from Florence, a postcard from Paris, the scarf from Rome folded gently into my drawer. Life in Seaview Point picked back up as if it had never paused. The book club resumed with new titles. I returned to my reading sessions at the library, where a few of the children remembered the stories I'd read months ago. One afternoon, I joined Elizabeth for a painting class and found myself recreating the curve of a gondola on still water. It was around that time that the letter arrived. I found it in my mailbox late on a Wednesday, a plain envelope, my name written in careful handwriting. The return address was Maple Glen. I stood at the kitchen counter looking at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper written by hand. Dear Martha, you're probably surprised to hear from me. I wasn't sure whether to write, but I thought you deserved to know what's been happening. This is Shelley. I got your address from Janice. She didn't want to share it, but I convinced her it was important. Craig hasn't been the same since you left. He's angry, short-tempered, and blames everyone but himself. He still says you stole the house. He even hired someone to track you down, though. So far, it hasn't worked. I don't know if it will. The kids ask about you. Not often, but when they do, I tell them you're starting fresh. That you needed space. They seem to understand more than their father does. I'm not excusing what he said to you. I just wanted to warn you. Please, be careful. Sincerely, Shelley. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it in half, walked to the kitchen sink, and dropped it in. The tap ran cold as I held the paper under the stream. The ink bled slowly, letters disappearing into blurred shapes. I watched until the envelope softened and tore. When it was gone, I dried my hands and returned to the balcony. The tide was low. A few gulls circled above the rocks. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and sat quietly watching the waves. I didn't think about the house, or Craig, or Shelley's warnings. I didn't need to. Later that evening, I called Janice. I told her about the letter, asked her not to give out my address again. She agreed without protest. He's still looking, she said, but I haven't told him anything. You're safe. I thanked her, then set the phone down. Outside, the wind was shifting slightly. Not stormy, just changing. I listened to it brush past the window and decided I would still go to the library in the morning, still walk to the bakery for bread, still show up for painting on Monday. Because whatever came next, I wasn't leaving. The library was quiet that morning, just the sound of a child flipping through a board book near the rug, and the low hum of the ceiling fan overhead. I finished reading Blueberries for Sal to a boy named Theo, whose mother smiled from the next aisle. After story time, I helped tidy up the chairs and slipped out the side door toward the bakery. The air was warm, just cool enough to need a light sweater, and the scent of cinnamon drifted down the sidewalk from Martha's shop. Inside, Martha was pulling a tray of muffins from the oven. She looked up and gave a small nod toward the back. Letter came for you. It's on the counter. I walked past the register and picked up the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakably Craig's, sharp, neat, impatient. I didn't open it there. I slipped it into my purse, helped Martha carry a tray to the front, and stayed to fold bakery boxes while she took the morning orders. When I got home, I set the envelope on the kitchen table. I made tea first, took off my shoes, folded the laundry that had dried on the line. Then finally, I sat down and opened the letter. It wasn't long. A page and a half written in blue ink. Mom, I hope you'll read this through. I won't waste your time begging. What's done is done, and I understand now that I handled it wrong. I said things I shouldn't have. I was angry. Maybe still am. Not at you, at the situation. I thought you'd be safer somewhere else. I thought I was doing the right thing. But you left. You sold the house. You disappeared. And I've had a long time to think about what that means. Shelley's been saying I need to make this right. That maybe you don't want to hear from me again, but that I owe it to you to try. So this is me trying. If you don't want anything to do with us, I understand. But if there's a chance, any chance you'd let me visit, I'd like to come. Just once. Just to talk. Craig. I read it twice, then folded it slowly and set it beside the teacup. Outside, the wind had picked up. I opened the door to the balcony and stood there, watching the branches sway along the coast. There was no anger in his words this time. No instructions. Just a question. A pause. I wasn't sure what to do with that. The next day, I brought the letter to Howard. We were having coffee on his back porch, and I slid it across the table. He didn't ask questions, just read it quietly, lips pressed together. When he finished, he looked up. He's reaching out. You don't have to reach back. But you could. I nodded. I know. That afternoon, I went for a walk. I passed the post office, the school, the little park where children chased each other between the benches. Every corner of Seaview Point felt more familiar now, like it knew me, like I belonged. The idea of someone from my old life stepping into it even for a minute felt strange, but I didn't throw the letter away. A week passed. I returned to the library, helped bake on Thursday, listened to Howard talk about a chamber music recital coming up at the town hall. I didn't mention the letter again. I didn't answer it either. I needed more time. Then on a Tuesday, the phone rang. It was Janice. Don't panic, she said right away, but Craig showed up at the old house. I was there checking on some documents for the Pearsons. He wanted your address. I sat down slowly. Did you give it to him? Of course not, she said. I told him you'd asked for privacy and that I didn't know where you were. But Martha, he may try there next. I thanked her, hung up, and called Martha that same afternoon. She already knew. He came in this morning, she said. Asked if I knew a woman named Martha Preston. I told him the name sounded familiar, but I wasn't sure. I asked if he seemed angry. No, she said. Just tired. That night, I didn't sleep well. I got up before sunrise, made coffee, and sat on the balcony with the sweater wrapped tight around me. The sky was pale pink over the water, the town still quiet. I tried to picture Craig walking down the boardwalk, stepping into my bakery, hearing my name spoken like it was just another customer order. 2 days later, a knock came at my door. Not loud, not hurried, just a knock. I opened it slowly, and there he was. Craig. His hair had more gray in it. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe just smaller, like something had worn down inside him. He didn't smile, just nodded once. Hi, Mom. I stepped back and let him in. Craig stepped into the apartment like someone unsure whether they'd really been invited. He looked around, taking in the space. Slowly, his eyes lingered on the painting above the couch, the books on the shelf, the vase of lilacs on the kitchen table. I offered him coffee, motioned to the small table near the window. He sat down quietly, fingers tapping the side of his mug while the kettle came to a boil. We didn't speak for a few minutes, just the soft clatter of cups and the hum of the stove between us. When I finally sat across from him, he took a sip, then rested the mug in both hands. You've got a good place, he said, glancing toward the open balcony door. Peaceful. I nodded. It is. He looked down, rubbed the edge of the table with his thumb. I didn't come to fight, he said, or to ask for anything. He paused, then added, I know I gave up the right to ask. I waited. He cleared his throat. The house. I didn't understand what it meant to you. Not really. I just saw square footage and mortgage math and college expenses. I forgot it was home. I folded my hands in my lap. You didn't forget. You just stopped seeing me in it. Craig looked up, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. I've been angry, he said. Angry at myself, at Shelley, at you, at how everything turned out. But I kept thinking about that letter you left. The part where you said you weren't the mother I raised. He stopped. That line stuck. I let the silence hang between us. The tide was starting to roll in outside. A faint breeze moved through the doorway. Shelley left, he said after a while. Took the kids and moved in with her sister. Said she needed space. I can't blame her. I was impossible. After you left, I spiraled. I know that now. I reached for my cup. Are you here for reconciliation, Craig, or for forgiveness? He looked at me sharply, then back down. I don't know, he admitted, maybe just to say I was wrong. Neither of us moved for a moment. I stood, walked to this counter, and set my empty cup in the sink. You said things that can't be unsaid, I said gently. But you're here. That means something. Craig stayed seated. His shoulders sagged a little, like the weight of the months had finally settled. I don't expect you to forget, he said. But I wanted to see you, to make sure you were okay. I turned back to him. I'm more than okay. I've built a life here. I'm not lonely. I have friends. I paint. I volunteer. I swim on Tuesdays. And I make my own coffee the way I like it. He smiled faintly. Sounds nice? It is, I said. It's not the life I expected, but it's mine. Craig stood slowly, walking over to the window. He looked out over the water. Can I ask one thing? That depends, I said. He turned. Would it be all right if I came back someday? Not to stay, just to visit. I didn't answer right away. I walked over, stood beside him, and looked out at the horizon. The water stretched wide and open. You can come back, I said, but not if you're trying to fix what's past. Only if you're willing to meet me where I am. He nodded, eyes still on the sea. I can do that. Craig left shortly after. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises. But when I closed the door behind him, I didn't feel the weight I expected. Just stillness. That evening, I sat with Howard on his porch. We shared a plate of peach cobbler Martha had dropped off and listened to the low hum of cicadas in the trees. He came, I said. Howard didn't look surprised. I figured he might. He's changed, I said. Not completely, but some. Howard nodded. You don't owe him anything. I know, I said. We sat quietly for a while, the sky darkening around us, the last of the sun trailing gold across the ocean. The breeze lifted slightly, and I pulled my shawl around my shoulders. Still, I said it felt good to see him. Howard smiled without turning his head. That's allowed. The next morning, I woke early. I made coffee and walked down to the water with a blanket under my arm. The sand was cool beneath my feet, the tide soft as it brushed the shore. I sat down and watched the horizon shift from gray to pale blue, the sky slowly opening. Somewhere behind me, Seaview Point was stirring. The bakery would open in an hour. Elizabeth would be setting up her easel. The world kept moving, and so would I. Craig might visit again, or he might not. But I was no longer waiting for his decisions to shape mine. I stood, brushed the sand from my hands, and turned toward home. After Craig's visit, life in Seaview Point slipped gently back into its rhythm. The summer days stretched long, golden, and calm, and the mornings brought the quiet comfort of routine, a walk to the bakery, a wave to Elizabeth as she set up her easel on the promenade, the hum of Howard's voice as he read a poem aloud over coffee. Sometimes my thoughts drifted back to Craig. I wondered what he told himself on the drive home, whether he felt a little lighter or just more uncertain. But I no longer felt the ache of waiting for someone else's words or forgiveness. The world here was wide and kind, filled with people who knew how to listen and who let each other grow at their own pace. One Saturday afternoon, Martha hosted a small gathering at her place. She served peach cobbler and coffee, and we sat on her porch watching the sun melt into the water. The conversation moved easily from favorite books to small-town news laughter bubbling up in gentle waves. When it turned to family, I didn't flinch. I spoke simply about my own story, the way I'd had to walk away to find my place again, the friends who became my family, and the peace I found in making a life that belonged to me. No one asked for more than I wanted to share. That quiet respect, letting me tell my story in my own time, meant more than any grand gesture. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. Leaving Maple Glen took courage. I didn't know I had, but it gave me back the chance to wake up each day without fear, without resentment, without the heavy shadow of regret. I learned it's never too late to draw a boundary or to start over, no matter your age. Dignity doesn't depend on someone else's approval. It lives in the choices you make, in the quiet strength to claim your own happiness. I had found justice not through payback, but by stepping into my own life with my head held high. On the first cool evening of fall, I walked the shore at sunset, the sand chilly beneath my shoes. The tide was rolling in steady and endless. I felt at home in a way I never had before. Justice, I realized, sometimes looks like choosing yourself and letting go of bitterness. It means finding kindness even after hurt and moving forward with hope. And sometimes, when the time is right, it means opening the door again, not out of obligation, but out of understanding and peace. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to make a brave change or start over, know you're not alone. I hope you'll share your story, or simply take a moment to reflect on what justice and belonging mean to you. Take care, and remember, it's never too late to begin again.